Everyone. I'm Ayush, and today I'll be presenting a paper titled Keeping an Eye on Congestion Control in the Wild with Nebby. This work was done in collaboration with my collaborators Lakshay, Raj, and my advisor Ben Liao. Now, the makeup of the internet's congestion control landscape influences how we think about a lot of things, including buffer sizing, AQMs, and in-network policing policies, and fairness and deployability. Moreover, end-host congestion control is a unique design space where we expect users to meet their selfish goals unselfishly. Therefore, it's an important problem in terms of monitoring the responsible deployment of CCAs on the internet. And surprisingly, this is not a new problem. In the past, there have been proposals for many tools that try to understand how different congestion control algorithms are deployed on the internet. The most recent of these measurement studies was actually done in 2019 using a tool called Gordon. And this tool, in fact, was one of the first measurement studies to reveal the deployment of PPR and how it was actually contributing to a significant share of downstream traffic of the internet. So last year, I was finishing up my thesis, and then my advisor walked in and basically said, "Hey, it's going to be a good idea if we try to rerun Gordon again and compared the measurement results from 2023 with a lot of the predictions and recommendations that we make in my thesis." So I thought this was a good idea as well, and we tried to rerun Gordon, but we were not very successful. So even though this was a tool that we developed and understood very well, and were able to successfully classify more than 70% of the websites we measured in 2019, in 2023, suddenly more than 80% of the websites were not responsive to us anymore. In terms of Gordon specifically, this was because a lot of these websites were detecting Gordon as a DDoS attack and therefore not responding to our requests. But funnily enough, this is not a problem that's unique to Gordon. This has been a trend that has continued in all previous congestion control algorithm identification tools. So the earliest of these tools, which was proposed more than 2 decades ago and called TBET, actually used very ad hoc strategies to try to identify simple algorithms like Renault and Tahoe on the internet. But once more sophisticated congestion control algorithms on the internet, like cubic and compound TCP, got introduced, TBIT did not work anymore. So, unsurprisingly, the follow-up measurement study in 2011 was partially motivated by the fact that TBIT did not work. Continuing this trend, in 2019, our previous measurement study, Gordon, and another measurement study called Inspect a Gadget, also found that now the AI was not applicable anymore because of the deployment of new congestion control algorithms like BPR on the internet. And again, we had to tweak our measurement strategies to make things work with the deployment of BPR. And most recently, and as I've discovered, Nebby found out that IG and Gordon are also not good enough. Therefore, continuing this trend of previous congestion control measurement strategies not being good enough in the face of newer applications and congestion control algorithms. But this time around, we sort of wanted to solve this problem once and for all, and therefore Nebby had an additional goal in trying to make congestion control algorithm identification on the internet future-proof. So in the future, if people want to continue to monitor the evolution of the internet congestion control landscape, we want them to be able to continue to use Nebby. Now, why is this such a hard goal to meet, and why were previous measurement strategies not able to meet this goal? Well, there are quite a few reasons that we go over in the paper, but primarily it comes down to three main things. The first of these is that people keep deploying new congestion control algorithms on the internet. So our measurement and identification strategy can't be ad hoc. We need to, and this is a problem that plagued one of the earlier congestion control algorithm identification tools like TBET, which were only targeting some simple versions of Renault and Tahoe. What we need here is we need general enough measurement strategies that can easily be extrapolated in newer congestion control algorithms, as well as give us enough insight into unknown congestion control algorithms. Secondly, we also want to work well with a wider range of applications and application traffic. This is another problem that plagued previous congestion control measurement tools. These tools only work for TCP and very specific kinds of TCP, but these are clearly not good enough for today. It's not hard to imagine that different websites might use different congestion control algorithms to serve different screens, different devices, and even different content. Finally, and this is the lesson that we've learned from Gordon's failings, is that we can't appear hostile. We need to try to be as passive as possible. And in fact, we sort of need to take an adversarial approach to this, where if there's a website that's trying to keep its congestion control algorithm deployment from us, it should not be able to detect the fact that you're actually trying to figure out what congestion control algorithm they're running. Now, if you isolate these three goals on their own, it actually turns out that there's an obvious way to identify CCAs while meeting all three of these criteria, albeit in a control setting. So let me explain what I mean by this. So let's review the task that we have at hand. You want to identify the congestion control algorithm run by a server. So a server is going to select a congestion control algorithm, and determined by whatever this algorithm is, it's going to decide how many packets it's going to put in flight, how quickly it's going to send out its data, the usual congestion control stuff. And basically what we need to infer is what congestion control algorithm is dictating this sending behavior. Well, an obvious way to do this is to retrace the cause from the effect. We can make a simple packet capture and use this packet capture to sort of understand what the bytes in flight are for the path, and then use this unique signature in response to some specific network condition to identify a specific congestion control algorithm. So we have this very simple way to do this, and in theory, this should work well. But unfortunately, on the internet, this is not the problem that we have to solve. The problem that we have to solve is that we have to identify a congestion control algorithm run by a remote server, and while the traffic is passing via the internet. So now the server is remote, and the traffic comes over the internet, over a network that's no more in our control. So how does this disrupt our earlier measurement technique? Well, first of all, we no more have control over the network condition. So because traffic is coming over the internet, we can no more control how the packets are impacted by the delay, the RTT. We don't know what bandwidth they're going to get. We don't know when they're going to drop. And therefore, it's very hard to determine causality. But fortunately for us, this is a problem that has been solved in congestion control measurement tools before, where they elect to have a local bottleneck. And because this bottleneck is local, we are able to control the bandwidth, the RTT, and the packet drops of an internet connection. But I think the bigger problem that we need to address over here are specific to the methodology that I discussed earlier, where we wanted to basically plot out this unique bytes and flight signature for each congestion control algorithm. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the measurement that we're making is for a remote server. And because the server is remote, we can no more make our measurement at the server. We need to make our measurement at the client. And because we are now at the client, we actually have visibility over a very small fraction of the packets in flight, which gives us a severe underestimate of what the actual bytes in flight are kept by the server. So this is basically the main problem that we need to solve. And how we solve this problem is actually quite straightforward. Well, in this setting, because the server is remote and we are at the client, there's no way we can go nearer to the server. But what we can do is we can get further away from the client by artificially delaying the packets between a capture point and the client itself. And what does this achieve? Well, what it achieves is that now it increases the fraction of the path that is visible to our packet trace or our capture point. And because this fraction is strictly larger, we are able to get a better estimate of the bytes in flight. And it's going to be closer to the actual value that the congestion control algorithm is seeing. And this is all by virtue of seeing a larger fraction of the packets in flight, by having control over a larger fraction of the pipe, by artificially making the pipe longer. And this is basically the key insight that Nebby works on. We make a connection where we passively collect packet traces while delaying the packets at the client. And this allows us to get an estimate of what the bytes in flight for a sender are, and then use the unique signatures to identify a sender's congestion control algorithm. In practice, we found that the simple strategy is good enough to capture distinct bytes and flight traces for most congestion control algorithms in the Linux kernel, as well as BBRB2. Obviously, the delay that we emulate has a lot of influence on the accuracy of these measurements. And naturally, the larger the delay, the better measurements. But in practice, we found that after more than 100 ms of additional delay, we get diminishing returns in terms of BIF accuracy. Moreover, since Nebby is also passive, for the first time, we have a congestion control identification tool that works with quick and real browser traffic as well. So we're able to use Nebby to measure flows while connecting to a website over a real web browser, and then see how the website uses different flows and different congestion control algorithms to serve different elements of the website that we're viewing via the web browser. So we have all these bytes and flight traces for all our different flows, serving all these different websites, but we're still left with the important task of classifying all of these bytes and flight traces. They're looking at these high volume of measurements, and especially given the current landscape of computing, the obvious answer here is to use some kind of machine learning. But in our case, we think that this is a pitfall that we need to avoid. And the reason we need to avoid this pitfall is because one of the goals for Nebby is to identify the deployment of unknown or undocumented congestion control algorithms on the internet. For this reason, we do not want to use machine learning-based classifiers that might risk overfitting unknown CTAs into known CTAs, therefore making us blind to their deployment. Instead, what Nebby does is it realizes that all reasonable CTAs operate with some feedback loop, with some periodic probes and oscillations in the congestion avoidance phase. So what it does is it actually just uses these oscillations and the shape of these probing behaviors to identify each individual congestion control algorithm. More specifically, what we do is we build a shape-based classifier where we take a bytes and flight measurement, divide it into its components, and extract these periodic regions as individual features. We then try to fit individual polynomials to each of these features and plot these polynomials and compare them to polynomials that we know describe the analogous features for known congestion control algorithms, therefore helping us identify them. So the result of this simple shape-based classifier is that you can successfully classify all species in the Linux kernel and BBRV2 with an average accuracy of 96%. And we discuss more details in the paper, but we basically show that our classifier is modular and demonstrably extendable with support for additional CCAs like FOPA and KCC. Moreover, because we're not using a machine learning-based approach, we were also successfully able to detect CCAs that were deployed by popular websites that were unknown and undocumented. So overall, our measurements were done from AWS instances in Ohio, Paris, Mumbai, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. And we did these measurements from different vantage points because we wanted to see if CC deployment can differ by region. And the measurements themselves were done for the Alexa top 20,000 websites over single TCP connections and single quick connections. We also measured a selection of websites that stream video, audio, and other dynamic web content via a Chromium web browser. Now, there are a lot of interesting findings from these measurements for which I would direct you to the paper, but overall, we found 5 key findings, which I will discuss in this presentation. The first of these findings was that CC deployment tends to differ by region. So while Cubic and BBR remain the two most dominant congestion control algorithms on the internet, their deployment tends to differ by region. More specifically, BBR seems to be more popular in the US and Europe as compared to Asia and South America. As a result of this trend, we found that the same website can deploy different congestion control algorithms in different regions. For example, Amazon.in uses Cubic in Mumbai and BBRV1 in Ohio. The second finding we have is that we notice a very slow migration to BBRV2. Now, BBRV2 was a revision to the original BBRV1 algorithm, which was proposed by Google in order to be more fairness conscious on the internet. But what we found is that by comparing our measurements to the measurements from 2019, we can see that 98% of the websites that deployed BBRV1 in 2019 have either stuck to BBRV1 or switched to Cubic. In fact, most websites that deploy BBRV2 are new adopters of BBR. The third trend that we've seen is that there is a significant number of unknown congestion control algorithms on the internet. More specifically, we found about 24% of websites that deploy CCAs that did not resemble any CCAs in the Linux kernel or BBRV2. About 200 of these websites were actually Google domains, which we expected to deploy some version of BBR. So we knew what BBRV1 and V2 looked like, but when we made our measurements in June 2023, we saw Google's deployed congestion control algorithm have a very specific probing behavior that did not resemble either BBRV1 or BBRV2. When we did check with Google regarding this, what we found was that we had actually discovered an early deployment of BBRV3, which was only released by Google a couple of months later. We also found a large proportion of websites hosting by Akamai, um, deploying a family of variants that also did not resemble any known congestion control algorithm. Some of the more popular websites that were deploying these variants included Apple, Hulu, Pornhub, and TikTok.com. We discussed this variant more in detail in the paper. The fourth trend we saw was that Quick actually has still a long way to go. So even though we measured all the 20,000 target websites using a Quick client, a very small number of them responded to our Quick handshake. In fact, about only 8% of the measured websites were deploying Quick, and among these websites, PBR and Cubic seemed equally popular. The last of the trends was what I alluded to earlier, which is that deployment can differ by asset type. We found that websites like Twitch and Apple TV were choosing to deploy different CCAs for serving different content over the same session. For example, over here in Twitch, we saw that the video stream was actually being delivered using BBR, but all the static assets or the banner ads were being delivered using Cubic for its congestion control. In general, we found that BBR is more popular with websites serving video. In summary, we introduced a fresh methodology for studying and identifying CCAs on the internet for TCP, Quick, and live clients. We show that while BBR's adoption has slowed down, most bandwidth-intensive applications still opt for BBR. BBR v3 and Akamai CC are case studies in using Nebby to catch the deployment of unknown congestion control algorithms and sort of signals to Nebby's extensibility in the future. Finally, Nebby is open source and available on GitHub. Thank you.